Good morning, everybody. So I believe that there are two kinds of college students when it comes to, some of you remember the first day of a brand new semester? There's the one student and, this kid's thinking, boy, this is an opportunity for me to redeem myself. I've made plenty of mistakes in the past. I have a new teacher, a new professor. Here's a brand new subject to conquer, new chance to prove myself, to raise my GPA a notch or two. Here's a student who's, they're excited because now they're going to get to climb a brand new mountain of opportunity. I'll show my parents that their hard-earned financial investment in my future is all worth it. Then there's the other kind of student. And this is the kid who's coming off the most recent semester. They're just inching their way a little closer to graduation and a future out there someday where there's no more school except for the life of hard knocks. We call that life. Here's the student who stares out into that brand new semester with a measure of anxiety thinking, oh man, here's a brand new mountain to climb, textbooks to read, research papers to write, exams to prepare for. But either way, a new semester it's a race to run. It's a new opportunity. There's new potential. Or maybe it's filled with so many difficult challenges that it feels like it's just another chance for me to mess up and make some mistakes, missteps along the way. But you can bet that no matter which student it is, one of the most common features in every class is when the professor or the teacher distributes the infamous class syllabus. The syllabus is a benchmark. Here's a summary of what you can expect over the next 12 or 13 weeks. It includes the number of research papers to be concluded on a manual typewriter. Right? Yeah, in my day. Now, in our case, when I was a student at Duke Divinity School, and I downloaded, this is a brand new Duke Divinity School syllabus for this fall, Systematic Theology 101. So it's 4 pages of stuff. And look, when I was there, I was 23 years old, so my brain was still working. Now, I read this and I'm thinking, man, this would fry me. This would do me in. But there's a course objectives and the textbooks that you've got to read, class participation. There's a date in here for the midterm and the final exam. The syllabus. It's an overview of the minimum standards, the expectations for this class, if you want to be a success. Y'all know how that works. Now, for me, and my wife and I were on opposite sides of this. We kind of played this game a little bit this week. The first day of semester was always stressful for me because, here I am getting my first look at this brand new syllabus, a list of demands. On the first day, for me, they always look worse than they really were. But then the professor would go over the syllabus, answer a few questions, and then we're off to the races. Same thing happens in the sports world, as you know. Sports come with expectations and aspirations. For example, if you went to Duke like I did and you're a football fan, that's trouble. 5 or 6 wins a year, we think that's a championship year. Some of you root for a college football team, anything less than 10 wins and a postseason trip to a bowl game would be a classic failure. We got some Clemson, Alabama people in this church. Now look, if y'all won half your games one year, that would be a disaster in the first degree. That would cause you to want to review the contract of the head coach. For you, it's like national championship or nothing. The same thing, that same kind of confidence has sort of bled its way over into the church. Sometimes it's an unwritten expectation, but it's there. You've seen it. You've experienced it. For example, it's understood, at least here at SMC, that all the senior leaders on the pastoral staff, we require a minimum of a master's degree. And then there are all kinds of requirements for other staff members. It kind of depends on the position that they hold. We have some clearly defined expectations for elders and board members. And then there are dozens, really there are hundreds of you, and you're the kind, you just roll up your sleeves and you serve and you get your hands dirty and you volunteer. And just for the record, The very first church that we read about in the book of Acts was designed from stem to stern. I mean, it was from the beginning to the end. It was going to be a volunteer-intensive organization, and we get that. It's one of the highlights of this church, that we are built on the shoulders and the energies of volunteers. For example, when you come onto this campus any day of the week, really, certainly on the weekends, 9 out of 10 people that you've already encountered this morning are volunteers, most of whom take their responsibilities with deep devotion. There are some unwritten hopes for people. Now, some of you, no, not you, but the people that go to that church, you know, there are people in church and they just want to occupy space. They just want to come on Sunday mornings and drink from the fire hydrant. And then they hope what's going to happen is they're going to get their ticket to heaven punched. And there's certain expectations that they bring with them. It's like a syllabus. But around here, we've been saying for decades that following Jesus is not about a religion. Jesus did not come to establish a religion. It's not about a denomination, a tradition, a set of rules and bylaws and doctrines and so, but Christianity is unlike any other religion in the world. Religions are always built on a carefully designed syllabus. And sometimes it is exhausting with all the to-do list. Now, for those of us who follow Christ, our syllabus is an overwhelming love story. Ours is just a large love letter from a living God. Now, there's one thing, though, let's be clear, that separates Christianity from all the other major religious systems in the world, and most of those differences are centered somewhere in the leaders of those religious systems. For example, take a look at this. This is just a very short list. There are hundreds of religious traditions in the world today. But here are the leaders of these particular religious traditions. Now, every single one of these groups has a sacred text. The Vedas for the Hindus, the Torah for the Jews, the Analects for those who follow Confucius, the Quran for those who are invested in Islam, the Book of Mormon for the followers of Joseph Smith. And that's just a very short list of some of the prominent religions recognized around the world. There are hundreds, lots more. But there's one thing that they all have in common. Lots of things that they don't, but there's one thing, and that is they have a carefully constructed, sometimes comprehensive syllabus of requirements. These are the minimum standards that will be required to keep their God happy and content. There's one other thing about their leaders. Did you notice? They're all dead. They're all dead. So let's be super clear that those of us who claim to be followers of Christ, we are serving a cause in this world, hoping to gain. We're not thinking that maybe if we get invested and we show up and we do the right things that we can get a few more brownie points or some extra credit, win some favor of God, and maybe we'll come out with an A average. No way. We serve, we help, we give our resources, we invest our life in the cause of Jesus in the world because God loves us. Not to get him to love us, he already does. Not hoping to get him to love us so that by completing all the assignments on this Christian syllabus, but because he already loves us. So for decades, we've been having honest conversations here at SMC about the danger. You have to be very careful if you decide that you're going to elevate the religious syllabus over your relationship with Jesus. Even this is not more important than Jesus. We borrowed the title of this series, Jesus is Greater Than Religion, from a book by the same title by Jefferson Bethke. Look at what he says. He says, you can obey and not love, but there's no way you can love and ignore obedience. The fact is that God has done all the heavy lifting and has completed all the hard work required. We just have to bow our knee and say yes. That's why Jesus is so much better than trying harder, doing more, and being good enough. In fact, how many of you remember the very final words of Jesus from the cross? You remember? Finished. Isn't that what he said? Finished. Jesus looked out from that cross in the direction of his Father and said, "It's done, Papa. I did it. I finished the course. I finished what you sent me here to do." Now, I try not to give you too many words in the original language because it messes with you, like the Hebrew and the Greek. But if you only learn one Greek word, this is the one to learn. This is a good one. Finished. Telestai. Just remember that word, telestai. It means finished, accomplished, done, completed. The ransom for our defiance and disobedience has been paid in full. And for the past 2,000 years, Christianity, it's not a religious system of rules, and it's all about pledging our allegiance to Jesus, who has already finished and completed the work of redemption and salvation. Look at how Paul writes this. He's writing to a first-generation church in the city of Corinth, which is in southern Greece, and look at what he says. "Dear brothers and sisters, when I was with you, I could not talk to you as I would to spiritual people. I had to talk as though you belonged to this world or as though you were infants in Christ." In other words, he's saying, you haven't grown up yet. "I had to feed you with milk, not with solid food, because you weren't ready for anything stronger. And you still aren't ready, for you're still controlled by your sinful nature. You are jealous of one another and quarrel with each other. Doesn't that prove that you are controlled by your sinful nature? Aren't you living like people of the world?" That's a great image because you might compare this to a little baby. You know, when a baby graduates from a bottle and they start having some soft baby food, that's a big day. That milk suddenly becomes a secondary source of refreshment. And then they start upgrading. And they go from those nasty mashed up green peas and carrots, and they go to a bowl of chocolate ice cream and Raisin Bran. Now, you try to get that kid to go back. And then when they get those permanent teeth in, they're able to sink those teeth into a cheeseburger and a basket of fries, and that's a great day for a child. And one day when they learn that there's a huge difference between a bowl of broccoli and a banana split, heaven can't be too far off. And my deal is, if you get just a little taste of amazing grace, you don't want to go back to religion. You don't want to go back to the syllabus and this long, legalistic to-do list. Let me illustrate that. How many of you have ever heard of the Mandela Effect? This was kind of new to me. I read about it a couple weeks ago. Let me give you a simple way to understand it. The Mandela Effect, this is what happens when when something happens to a large group of people, but they don't see it exactly alike. It can be summed up with flawed memory. Our memories are just not that great sometimes. Certainly, you've been with a group of people at some point and you witnessed something, and then you turn to each other and you start comparing memories and you figure out, hey, we didn't see the same thing at all. It happens every day in a courtroom somewhere. You know, there are several witnesses on the stand and they don't see things exactly the same. Well, let me show you how the Mandela Effect works. Now, I'm going to show you a list of images. One of these is the real thing and one is not. Take a look. There is no such thing as Jiffy peanut butter. Only Jif. Okay? How about this? Nope. It really is spelled tunes. What else we got? Oh, yeah, Oscar Mayer. That's the way it's spelled. Wonder why we don't call it mayor. Okay? Now, Skechers, if it had a T in it, that would be like sketching. Those are shoes. Anybody have Skechers on in here this morning? Yeah, okay. All right. Whoa, let's see. Which one, Susan? This one? It's that one. It's that one. All right, keep going. You see how, the cornucopia. Or not. Look it up. I'm not going to tell you. Okay, Fruit of the Loom. Don't look it now. Double stuff. Everybody likes a double stuff, but there's only one F in stuff. Is that the last one? No, Kit Kat. Does it have a hyphen in it? How many say hyphen? Yeah, you're wrong. There is no hyphen. Ah, Chick-fil-A. You can't go, don't go there today. Which one's correct? You go figure it out. I'm not going to tell you. Now, here's, is that all? Take me to the next slide if that's it. Yeah, okay. Today I want to challenge you to consider that there are some things that you have been taught that are not correct. I've lost count the number of times somebody said to me, Bob, I can't live the Christian life. I can't do it. The standards and the requirements are too demanding. And that almost always prompts me to ask the $64,000 question, so can you tell me what it means to live the Christian life? And most of the time, a person will say, well, what it means is you got to put Jesus in the top spot of my life. I've got to make Jesus number one. But honestly, Bob, I've just got to be honest with you. I have so many other demands and commitments. I just can't always keep Jesus in that top spot. Let me tell you, there's a lot more confusion in our world today about what it means to follow Jesus and live out the Christian life than ever before. So, is there anybody in here who would take me out back and tar and feather me if I told you that Jesus has no interest in being your number one? He doesn't want to be your number one, because if Jesus is your number one, that means there's a number two, and Jesus is not willing to play that game. He just doesn't. For example, if I say to Susan, you are my number one girl, you think that boat's going to float? Going to sink like a rock? I'm telling you. What if I say, you are my main squeeze? She's not interested in being my main squeeze. She is passionate about being my only squeeze, and she is the least bit excited about me squeezing somebody else. If she believes that, if she were to think that that she's just one among a bunch of other squeezes, let me tell you something, there is going to be some trouble in paradise. It's always helpful sometimes for me to turn to the old wagon wheel example. I've done this with you before. Now, look at the wagon wheel. You've got the center hub. Now, here's what we dream about here at SMC. If we can figure out how to move Jesus from the periphery of life, where he's just bouncing around, and if we can put him in the center, then that gives him an opportunity to speak into every other area of life. In other words, if he's here, he's not just an add-on. So we have a little trouble with our work or our career, and we say, well, let me put a little Jesus on me, like a little bit of lotion or something like that. Jesus doesn't want to share this top spot. Not with anything or anybody else. I've been preaching that message for decades around here. I've shown this image up here for a bunch of times. Jesus wants to occupy the top spot in such a way that there is no close second. How many of you are familiar with how many of you, come on, y'all. There's not a person in this room that didn't survive one class or two without the old Cliff's Notes. Now, I've got to tell you, there was a time or two when Cliff's Notes saved my caboose. Yeah? Y'all know what I'm talking about. Some people tell me, they say, Bob, just give me the Cliff's Notes of the Bible. Just net it out, break it down, give me the outline. I need the highlights of the Christian life. Give me the summary of what I need so that I can make sure that God's okay with me. By the way, these are Cliff's Notes of the Bible. The Old Testament and the New Testament. So, son of a gun. Some of y'all are going to say, where'd you get those? Let me get me a copy of those. A long time ago, I lost count of the number of people that I've met who are they're working hard every day, just following the rules of the Christian life in hopes that one of these days God will look over their performance record and he will give us a big check mark and punch our ticket into heaven. Hey, look, this is my study Bible. If I hand you this Bible, and if I say to you, 31,000 words, verses and stuff. If I hand you this Bible and say, here's the syllabus, and in this book is an outline of the minimum requirements for you to live a successful Christian life, you're going to roll your eyes. You're going to say, you got to be kidding me. This would be impossible. And the fact is, it is. The good news is that even though this book gives us reliable and time-tested information, this book covers every single area of your life, no exceptions. It's 4,000 years old. But it's not a religious book with a play-by-play, detailed game plan for living. I would suggest to you that this is like a gigantic love letter, straight from the heart of God to you, and the central message of this book is always the same. Grace, grace, and grace. There's a love letter on every single page. Grace has been so neglected in the church at the expense of the rules. We'd rather have boundaries and a simple outline of the to-do list, and that's because one of the reasons why some of you struggle so with grace is because it is a contradiction of just about everything that you've always been taught about religion. Sometimes somebody will challenge me and they'll say, this happens more frequently than you imagine. Somebody will say, Bob, is grace all you ever talk about? And I sometimes say, what else is there? Our journey with Jesus starts and ends with the freedom that comes from amazing grace. Here's how I know. Look at Ephesians 2. God saved you by His grace when you believed. You can't take credit for this. There you go, see. You can't earn it. It is a gift from God. Salvation is not the reward for the good things we have done, so none of us can boast about it. But here's what happens. We read that, and then pretty soon we just slip right back into our old ways of trying to comply with the to-do list, and here's the to-don't-do list. And you know what we call that? Legalism. It's legalism. And it develops a phony confidence in us that we can earn God's favor if we just keep our nose clean, obedience, devotion, allegiance to the syllabus, the blueprint, the guidelines. And I've said it many times, nobody can be that good. Can't happen. And so what if there's a better way? That's what this series is all about. So let me take you on a short introduction to the low-hanging fruit of systematic theology. Low-hanging. Starts with two questions. The questions are always the same. Every systematic theology class that I've ever known starts with two questions. Number one, first question, what do I believe? What do I believe? Practically every decision that I make in life is based on the things that I believe. Let me explain that. How many of you would say, you don't raise your hands on this one, but how many of you would say that almost every careless blunder and blooper in your life could have been avoided if you would have thought more clearly about what you believe before you did it? How many times did we wind up in the ditch and we said, what was I thinking? And the fact is, we weren't thinking. Or else, I sometimes call it stinking thinking. We were thinking all right. Most of the worst decisions that I've ever made in life was because I was believing the wrong things. And that's because our decisions are almost always based on what we believe. Now, somebody in this room right this minute, or somebody listening online, you're telling yourself, not me, I'm the one exception to the rule. You want to bet? Decisions that you make based on faulty information have the potential to leading to catastrophic failure. And we've all seen it. Here's a simple example. This is not partisan or political or anything, so spare me the email. Whether or not you believe that the coronavirus vaccines are safe and effective, however you believe about that will determine whether or not you choose to get vaccinated. And one way or the other, your life is going to be affected by that. And maybe even some other people too. Not only by your decision, but you see what you believed that informed the decision. Let me illustrate. Not long after we were born, it started to be, we were just barely out of the crib, and it became very clear to us that we would be rewarded in this life based on performance, right? For example, we were cheered and celebrated when we learned to walk and when we started saying a few words, and we were scolded firmly if we dumped our plate of pasta on the floor. So we were starting to learn some things. We gained approval and kudos when we learned to use the potty. And then we were quickly put in timeout when we shoved our little brother or sister down in the playground. Pick up your toys, and there's a bonus. Crawl out of bed before the green light comes on, and you will give up television for a whole day. The plan was simple. Follow the rules. And it will lead to success and prosperity. Take advantage of the boundaries, and you're going to face the consequences, little guy or little gal. And somehow that same way of thinking made its way into our relationship with God. We were told in dozens of ways that our status and our credibility with God is influenced by our performance, our behavior. Do the right thing, follow the rules, keep yourselves inside the boundaries, the margins, and God will compensate you. Otherwise, you're walking on thin ice. And then some preacher like me has the audacity to start talking about grace, which teaches just the absolute opposite, that once we recognize what Jesus accomplished for us, then we start to align our decisions, behaviors, and lifestyles with the plans and the priorities of God. It's just the opposite. How we think almost always determines our decisions, and our decisions are what shape our direction in life. Let me give you a simple illustration. Many of us grew up when we were kids going to the neighborhood pool in the summer. We were members of Hillside Pool when we were kids. It was a 5-minute bike ride from where I grew up. Now, at certain times, y'all remember this? If you went to a pool when you were a kid, at certain times the lifeguard would blow the whistles and everybody had to clear the pool. And us kids, we would head to the snack bar. Now, for me, it was always a moon pie or a Baby Ruth candy bar and a root beer. Kind of standard. Once in a while, Mom would send a bologna sandwich and maybe some chips. But then, the legendary 30-minute clock. Y'all remember that? Everybody knew that after you ate that moon pie or that peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you had to sit out for 30 minutes or you'd get cramps and you would go to the bottom of the pool and you would drown. You would be dead. Absolutely not true. I read the other day, somebody speculated that it was a conspiracy concocted by a group of lifeguards. Another guy that I saw this week, he said, I don't know whoever came up with this. What happened to the clock? I'm glad they don't put me on a timer, by the way. A guy said the other day, he said, whoever came up with that 30-minute thing, I calculated that guy owes me 2 years in the pool. So, how many of you were taught that when you attended church, you had to dress in your Sunday best? Not your best, your Sunday best, which in my case included those awful clip-on neckties, and my mom would buy those scratchy wool pants. Plus, we had to polish our one pair of Sunday dress shoes every Saturday night because you never knew when Jesus was going to be standing at the door of the Sunday school building inspecting your shoes. About 25 years ago, here at St. Mark's, we decided that we were going to sort of take the emphasis off how people dressed on Sundays. And no kidding, one weekend in the other building over there, we didn't have this building here. Well, I overheard a woman. She was talking to a brand new couple in our church, and they always wore jeans on Sunday. And I heard her say, well, maybe nobody has ever told you, but around here we wear our Sunday best. That's the closest that I ever came to going to prison for choking a church member. But I waited until the couple with the jeans were out of earshot, and I said to her, let me tell you something about them. Those jeans are their best. That's all they have. Get over yourself. Amen. I mean, anyway, that's just a simple example that for years we've been trying to help you see that a religious checklist, or if we get all bound up inside with religious legalism, over-focus on the rules, sometimes it's all we think about. Wouldn't it have been really cool if that woman could have looked at them and said, wow, they're going to experience Jesus here today. But I guess not because of the jeans. How many of you, don't raise your hands, but how many of you have ever been on a diet? The easier question would be, how many of you have never been on a diet? Have you ever noticed that when you're on a diet, every commercial on television is about food? Y'all seen that? Because you're focused. An old Chinese philosopher wisely said, watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words and they become your actions. Watch your actions and they become your habits. Watch your habits, they will influence your character. And watch your character, it will determine your destiny. And unlike some of us were taught, some of you you believed your entire formative years that God was mad at you. Somebody was shouting at you from a stage telling you that God was ticked and that he's moving around this planet looking for all the moral screw-ups, and he's got his gigantic red permanent marker, and he's going to start putting a whole bunch of X's on your bad performance. And guess what? That's one of the things that's going to cause thousands of people in this city today to never consider that we might have a message that could set them free. Because somebody has said to them, God is mad at you. Some church convinced them that the Christian life was all about performance, rules, and the consequences for breaking the rules. And if we continue to paint God as a ruthless adversary who just wants to get even with a whole bunch of sinners, then millions of people are probably going to continue to run away in the other direction. And who can blame them? But people flock to Jesus. So why? Because he was so compelling and winsome? Sure. But they were attracted to his message. It was a message of grace. I believe that's one of the reasons why Paul reminded us of the purpose. Do you know the purpose of the law and the Ten Commandments? You know the purpose of the law? Right here it is. Romans 3. No one can ever be made right with God by doing what the law commands. The law simply shows us how sinful we are. But as people sinned more and more, God's grace increased even more. Yes? So would some of you be willing to admit that some of the things that you have been told about Jesus are simply not consistent with the teachings of the Scriptures? I don't know, maybe you attended a church that was determined to tell you how bad you are and how mad God is about that. Now, hey, look, we don't dodge sin around here. We talk about depravity and sin all the time. But our focus is not on our badness. We have chosen to focus on God's goodness. There's a difference. Systematic Theology 101 always starts with the question, what do I believe? And then the second, equally important question is what we believe true? I've said it many times. There is nothing you can do to convince God to love you more than he already does. Nothing. There is nothing you can do that could persuade God to love you less. God's love maxed out on an old rugged cross. Jesus, what did he say? The greatest love you can show is to give your life for your friends. He should know. Remember that it was the Apostle Paul. The guy wrote 2/3 of the New Testament. He faced the same pressures we do when he was trying to introduce grace into a brand new culture. And now Paul was a religious legalist. He was a Jewish rules keeper from way back. In fact, look at how he describes his situation. Now, don't miss some of the language. I think maybe we have some of the language highlighted here. If other people have reason for confidence in their own efforts, that is the to-do list, I have even more. I was circumcised when I was 8 days old. I'm a pure-blooded citizen of Israel, a real Hebrew if there ever was one. I was a member of the Pharisees who demand the strictest obedience to the Jewish law. I was so zealous that I harshly persecuted the church. And as for righteousness, I obeyed the law without fault. A plus, Paul. A plus on performance. You take a look at Paul's final exam, no red marks. No X marks at all. And the Jewish religious practices that Paul is talking about here, remember now, they go back 2,000 years before he was even born. These people had been following these Jewish traditions for 20 centuries. So nobody's going to give up 20 centuries of tradition without a struggle. So when Paul starts teaching his fellow Jews about grace, watch this now. See if you've ever heard this. I bet you I've heard this 2 or 3 dozen times. People said it to me. Hey, Paul, grace, if you keep talking about grace, man, people are just going to keep doing whatever they want to do. And they're going to ignore God's boundaries and laws. And Paul continued to say, no, once people understand God's grace and mercy, they won't magically stop their sinful behavior. They won't become sinless, but they will sin less. They just do. Because they're overwhelmed with amazing grace. Not because they're afraid of God or afraid of punishment if they violate the standards and the priorities, but because they never got over God's love story. The people who mentored me during my formative years, including my parents, they wanted me to live a Christ-centered life. I wanted to. It was clear that my decisions would eventually determine what my spiritual reputation would be. You've heard me say this many times, I don't ever want to do anything that would tarnish the reputation of Jesus. But my standing before God was determined a long time ago on a cross. About 5 years ago, some of you remember, we spent about 2 months just plowing our way through a letter that Paul wrote to a first-generation group of Jesus followers in the province of Galatia, which is Turkey today. It was his letter to the Galatians. And what we learned in that series is you can read, it won't take you but 30 minutes to read Galatians. Paul is saying you can't mix law and grace. It's like oil and water. It's like trying to stir 3 or 4 good eggs into a rotten egg for your breakfast omelet. You aren't going to eat it. But watch this. The churches in Galatia were populated with a group called the Judaizers. And here they believe, so they're trying to reach Gentiles. That would be us, non-Jews. And they believed that before a Gentile could become a follower of Jesus, then they had to become Jewish. And they had to start practicing all the Jewish laws if they ever wanted to yield to Jesus and have their sins forgiven and a promissory note of heaven. They had to accept all the laws in the book of Leviticus in the Old Testament. They were bound up in 613 laws to be exact. You had 10 commandments and 603 footnotes. It was going to be grace, but it had to be something else. It had to be the rules. And in their case, it was grace plus the law. So Paul says to the Galatians, I'm shocked that you're turning away so soon from God who called you to himself through the loving mercy of Christ. You are following a different way that pretends to be the good news, but it is not good news at all. You are being fooled by those who deliberately twist the truth concerning Christ. Let God's curse fall on anyone, including us and even an angel from heaven who preaches a different kind of good news than the one we preach to you. I say again what we have said before. If anyone preaches any other gospel than the one you welcomed when I was with you, let that person be cursed. Paul is saying there is only one gospel message. The message of grace. Look at these. He said, I'm surprised. how quickly you've turned away from what I taught you to follow a different kind of good news. Verse 7, you are being fooled by those who deliberately twist the truth. It's interesting that the English Standard Version translates this word as distort. Somebody has distorted the truth. The King James Version uses the word pervert. Somebody has perverted the truth. And the same thing that happened to Paul can happen to us. It creates a lot of confusion. And there's only one way then to get back on the track of grace. Have you ever noticed that Paul begins almost every single one of his letters? He says, grace and peace to you, grace and peace to you. Sometimes I'll sign letters that I write to people. At the end, I'll say grace and peace, because you almost never see grace without peace. They just, like Paul writes to this church in Corinth. And he says, I worked harder than all the other apostles. I did it. Man, I was good. I exhausted the to-do list. And yet, it was not I, but God working through me by his grace. The test, let me tell you something. The test of my almost 5 decades in ministry will never be based on how hard I worked, how many people showed up, how large our budgets, how many new buildings we raised up and paid for. Is certainly not going to be about how many friends I have on Facebook, because I don't even know. And it's not going to be based on how many books I've written. I haven't written any books, but I might. The only test, there's only one test that I want to pass. Did I follow with allegiance the teachings of the Scriptures? And did I demonstrate kindness and grace along the way? That's it. You've heard me say it many times, haven't you? Jesus plus anything, nothing. Jesus plus nothing, everything. So when a person decides to take a stand with Jesus, it means freedom. We're set free based on what happened on a cross. Christ has truly set us free, Paul writes to the Galatians. Now make sure you stay free and don't get tied up again in slavery to the syllabus. Look, I don't follow God to be free. I obey God because I am. While we're here, let me have a couple more minutes. Good night, the time is fine. I need to introduce you to one word, and then we'll be out. Justification. I know it's a big word. Don't freak out. Justification. There's a lot of confusion. So if you die today, and if God said, why should I open the doors of heaven to you? Most likely, many of you would say, because Jesus died for my sins, and that's partly true. Let me explain that. You've heard me talk about the great exchange all the time. I sometimes prefer to call it the big swap. It's when Jesus is on the cross and he swaps my sin and my guilt for his impeccable perfection. That transaction happened when Jesus was on the cross, when he died. That entire exchange can be described with one word: justification by faith. Look at these verses. Christ made us right with God, freed us from sin. We know that a person is made right with God by faith in Jesus Christ, not obeying the law. Christ never sinned, but God treated him as a sinner so that Christ could make us acceptable to God. There's the swap. And then since we have been made right with God by our faith, we have peace with God. This happens through Jesus Christ. Hey, look, I try to obey the Scriptures. I try to bring my life in line with the teachings of God's Word. It just makes life better if I live within the boundaries and margins of God. But I don't do that so that I can be justified. I do that because I'm already justified and set free. The purpose of the commandments is just to show me how much I need a Savior and Redeemer. And that's true for you. Now you don't have to worry about grace if you can keep the law 100% of the time. You'll be good to go. But no matter how diligent I am in keeping the rules, coloring inside the lines, compliance is not the final answer. People are counted righteous, Paul said. That is, right with God, not because of their work, but because of their faith in God who forgives sinners on a cross. Grace and only grace. Bob, I'm trying. So was I. I used to try hard. Bob, I've prayed about it, so did I. Bob, I raised my hand once in a service, or when I was at summer camp when I was a kid, or I had my first communion when I was a teenager, or I was confirmed and I got baptized when I was 14, and I did a whole lot of those things too. But I did not have a relationship with the only person who could redeem me. I got a whole lot of check marks. Jesus paid the price in full for my sin. So I don't have to keep jumping through a bunch of hoops. I'm justified, freed up, set right. So Paul says, for no one can ever be made right with God by doing what the law commands. We are made right with God by placing our faith in Jesus Christ. God in His grace makes us right in His sight. He did this through Christ Jesus when He freed us from the penalty for our sins. People are made right with God when they believe that Jesus sacrificed His life. But Bob, what about the people who don't believe what we do? Bob, I have some friends who are as passionate and they are as certain. They believe that the religion they practice is the right way. So how can we be sure that they're wrong? It's because whatever religious tradition they follow, their founder is dead. Jesus is the only one who returned from the grave. There is no place on planet Earth where you can go and see a grave marker that reads, "Here lies the body of Jesus who claimed to be the Son of God." Only a sign that proclaims He is not here. Religion says there are good people and there are bad people. Jesus says there are only broken people and those who need grace. Religion always starts with the syllabus. You just follow the rules and God will love you for it. And it's usually attached to a whole bunch of requirements and demands and prerequisites. Jesus says, no. God so loved the world that He gave. Gave means what? Gift. Gift means what? Grace. Grace means what? It's free. Free for us. I mean, it cost Jesus everything. Maybe that's why He attached it to a gigantic love letter. Straight from the hand of God to you. Syllabus, love letter. You decide. Love you, SMC.